3 weeks of silence. You've mostly made peace with it. You've told yourself it's over, that it was never really anything, that you should stop checking your phone every time it buzzes hoping it's them. And then, at 9:42 on a random Tuesday night, a text. Hey stranger, thinking about you. Nothing more. No explanation for the silence. No plan to actually see each other. Just enough to make your chest do that familiar, hopeful flip. And just like that, you're back in it, checking your phone again, reading into every word of a 2-line message, feeling, for a few hours, like maybe this time it means something is finally about to change. It won't. And some part of you probably already knows that, even as you feel the pull anyway. That pull has a name, and understanding it is one of the single most useful pieces of psychology for protecting your heart in modern dating. It's called breadcrumbing, the practice of doling out just enough attention to keep someone hooked without ever intending to build anything real. And the reason it works on otherwise smart, self-aware people isn't a character flaw. It's brain chemistry. Today, we're going to break down exactly why breadcrumbing is so powerfully addictive, why so many of us stay far longer than we mean to, and how to walk away, not through willpower alone, but by understanding the mechanism well enough to finally outsmart it. Let's get into it. Part 1. The science of the breadcrumb. Why this is so addictive. To understand breadcrumbing, we need to understand a concept from behavioral psychology called intermittent reinforcement. And to do that, it helps to go back to one of the most famous experiments in the history of psychology. In the mid-20th century, psychologist B.F. Skinner studied how different patterns of reward affect behavior using what's now called a Skinner box, a simple chamber where an animal, often a rat or pigeon, could press a lever to receive a reward, like a food pellet. Skinner tested several different reward patterns. In one condition, the animal received a reward every single time it pressed the lever, a predictable, consistent pattern. In another condition, the animal only received a reward some of the time, unpredictably, no matter how consistently it pressed the lever. The finding that made this experiment famous, and that has shaped an enormous amount of psychology and even modern app design since, was this. The unpredictable reward pattern produced far more persistent, compulsive, lever-pressing behavior than the consistent, predictable one. When rewards came every time, the animals pressed the lever calmly, as needed. When rewards came unpredictably, the animals pressed the lever obsessively, far more often than necessary, and the behavior became extremely resistant to stopping, even long after rewards became rare or stopped altogether. This pattern is called intermittent reinforcement, and it turns out to be one of the most powerful behavioral conditioning mechanisms that exists, precisely because unpredictability keeps the brain in a heightened, hopeful, seeking state. Now let's connect this directly to breadcrumbing. When someone gives you consistent attention and affection, regular contact, follow-through, clear effort, your brain processes this as safe and predictable. It feels good, but it doesn't create the same obsessive, anxious pull that unpredictable attention does. But when attention arrives unpredictably, silence, then suddenly warmth, then silence again, with no pattern you can reliably anticipate, your brain's reward system, largely governed by the neurotransmitter dopamine, gets activated in a fundamentally different and more compulsive way. It's worth being precise about what dopamine actually does here, because it's often misunderstood as simply a pleasure chemical. More accurately, dopamine is heavily involved in anticipation and seeking behavior, the drive to pursue a reward. not just the satisfaction of receiving it. Research on dopamine and reward has found that dopamine activity often spikes most intensely not when a reward is received, but when a reward is uncertain and possible, exactly the emotional state breadcrumbing creates. Every small, unpredictable crumb of attention, the random text, the occasional like, the brief return after a long silence, triggers that same anticipatory dopamine response the Skinner box rats experienced, which is precisely why breadcrumbing can feel so disproportionately captivating relative to how little is actually being offered. You're not imagining the pull. It's a well-documented mechanism of how reward-based learning works in the brain, and it operates below the level of conscious, rational decision-making. Part 2. Why we settle for less. The psychology beneath the hook. Understanding the dopamine mechanism explains why breadcrumbing is compelling in the moment, but it doesn't fully explain why some people stay in these cycles for weeks, months, or even years, well past the point where the pattern is obviously not leading anywhere. For that, we need to look at a few additional psychological layers. The first is what's sometimes called the sunk cost effect, applied to emotional investment rather than money. The longer you've already invested hope, attention, and emotional energy into a connection, the harder it becomes to walk away, even once the return on that investment is clearly diminishing. Because walking away means acknowledging that some of that investment may have been, in hindsight, not worth it. It can feel psychologically easier to keep hoping for a return than to accept that loss directly, even when continuing costs more in the long run. The second layer is hope itself, and specifically a phenomenon sometimes described as near-miss thinking. Each small crumb of renewed attention can be interpreted, in the moment, as evidence that maybe this time is different. Maybe this text is the beginning of them finally being consistent, finally being ready. This hope isn't irrational or foolish. It's a very natural response to a genuinely ambiguous situation. But breadcrumbing, by its nature, is specifically designed, whether consciously or not on the breadcrumber's part, to never fully confirm or fully deny that hope, which keeps it alive far longer than the actual evidence would justify if looked at plainly. The third layer, and one worth naming with real compassion, involves self-worth. For some people, particularly those who've internalized a belief that they need to earn love through patience, effort, or being easy and low maintenance, breadcrumbing can tap into a pre-existing narrative that inconsistent effort from someone else is simply what they should expect, or perhaps even what they deserve. If you find yourself thinking, well, at least they still think about me sometimes, as a form of comfort, it's worth gently examining whether that thought reflects a realistic standard for how you want to be treated, or a standard shaped by past experiences that taught you to expect less than full, consistent care. It's important to say clearly, recognizing these patterns in yourself is not the same as blaming yourself for being breadcrumbed. The responsibility for inconsistent, low-effort behavior lies with the person doing it, not with the person hoping for something real. But understanding your own psychological pull toward staying is what gives you the leverage to interrupt it, rather than being carried along by it indefinitely. Part 3. Actionable advice, recognizing and breaking the cycle. Let's turn this into something practical. How to recognize breadcrumbing clearly and how to actually break free of it. Step 1. Learn the clear signs. Breadcrumbing tends to follow a recognizable pattern, and naming it accurately is the first step to breaking its spell. Signs include contact that is frequent enough to keep you engaged, but consistently too infrequent or shallow to build anything real. Communication that intensifies noticeably, whenever you start to pull away or lose interest, almost as if your waning interest itself triggered more effort. Vague or repeatedly postponed plans that rarely convert into actual, followed through meetups. Warm, affectionate language that isn't backed up by consistent action or follow through. And a persistent feeling, if you're honest with yourself, that you are doing significantly more emotional work to sustain the connection than the other person is. Step 2. Track the pattern with actual evidence, not just feeling. Because the dopamine pull of breadcrumbing actively distorts perception in the moment. Remember, this is a well-documented neurological mechanism, not a willpower failure. It helps enormously to track the objective pattern rather than relying on how you feel in any single hopeful moment. Consider actually noting, even briefly, the dates and nature of contact over a few weeks. Written down and looked at plainly, the pattern, long silences punctuated by minimal, low-commitment gestures, is often far more obvious and far less flattering than it feels while you're inside it, hoping for the next crumb. Step 3. Ask the reframing question, would I accept this as a full explanation? A genuinely useful mental exercise. Imagine the person explain their behavior to you directly and honestly. I like keeping in occasional contact with you, but I don't plan to build anything consistent or committed. Would you be satisfied with that as an honest answer? If the answer is no, then the vague, unstated version of the same behavior deserves the same response, even though it's easier to tolerate when it isn't said out loud. Breadcrumbing works partly because it's never explicitly stated, which allows hope to fill the silence. Naming the implicit reality plainly to yourself closes that gap. Step 4. Communicate your needs once, clearly. Then observe. Don't negotiate. If you want to give the connection a genuine, fair chance before stepping away, it can be worth communicating directly what you're looking for. Consistent contact, follow through on plans, whatever matters to you. Exactly once, calmly and clearly. What matters most after that is simply observing what happens, without pleading, repeating the request, or negotiating it further. A person who is capable of and interested in offering what you've asked for will generally show it through changed behavior, not just changed words. A return to the same pattern after being told clearly what you need is, itself, a complete and honest answer. Step 5. Interrupt the dopamine loop deliberately. Because part of what keeps this cycle going is a neurological mechanism, not just a thought pattern. Addressing it purely through willpower or logic is often insufficient on its own. Practical interruptions help, muting or limiting notifications from this specific person, deliberately creating space before responding to a sudden crumb of attention, rather than reacting immediately, and consciously redirecting your attention toward people and activities that offer the thing breadcrumbing never will: genuine, reliable engagement. Each time you resist reacting to a crumb, you weaken the conditioned response a little further. Each time you react immediately, you reinforce it. This is exactly how the underlying mechanism works, in both directions. Step 6. Reframe walking away as choosing abundance, not giving up on scarcity. It can help enormously to reframe leaving a breadcrumbing dynamic, not as losing a potential connection, but as freeing up your emotional energy for a connection that could actually meet you consistently. As long as your attention and hope stay tied up in someone offering crumbs, you have less genuine availability, practically and emotionally, for someone capable of offering the whole loaf. Walking away isn't closing a door on love. It's opening space for a door that can actually stay open. Step 7. Extend yourself real compassion during the withdrawal period. If you do step back from a breadcrumbing dynamic, expect it to feel genuinely difficult for a period of time, similar to any withdrawal from an intermittent reward pattern. You may find yourself checking your phone, wanting to reach back out, or feeling a pull to respond the moment contact resumes. This isn't weakness. It's the same neurological mechanism working in reverse, and it does fade with consistency and time. Treat yourself with the same patience you'd offer a friend going through the same thing. Part 4. Reframing. You deserve the whole loaf. Here's the reframe I want to leave you with. Breadcrumbing works by keeping you focused on the crumbs, the occasional text, the sporadic warmth, the small hopeful moments, instead of on the much larger, much more telling picture, the overall pattern of inconsistency, low effort, and unmet needs surrounding those crumbs. It's easy inside that dopamine pull to mistake the presence of any attention at all for evidence that you're valued. But real value isn't measured in the size or sweetness of the occasional crumb. It's measured in consistency, follow-through, and effort freely given, not extracted through withdrawal and hope. You're not asking for too much by wanting someone who shows up reliably. You're not being too demanding by wanting plans that turn into real meetups, or affection that isn't rationed out unpredictably to keep you hooked. That standard isn't excessive. It's simply what a genuine, healthy connection actually looks like, and it's available to you, just not from someone who has shown you, through a clear and repeated pattern, that they're only offering crumbs. You deserve the whole loaf, consistent effort, real presence, and a connection that doesn't require you to live in a state of hopeful, anxious waiting. Trust the pattern over the promise, and give your heart to someone whose actions have already earned it. If this gave you the clarity you needed, stay with us. Next, we'll look at how to rebuild your standards and expectations after a pattern like this, so the next connection you invest in is one that was actually worth the investment from the very beginning.